So I'm Dr. Monica McQuaid, and I'm happy to welcome you, along with my colleagues Ida Barisi, Dr. Evan Rivelis, Dr. Rosa Sejo, Miriam Franco, and Marcel Pacha to CERS's second annual webinar series on transition planning. Today is the third and final presentation in a series of 3 webinars. If you were unable to attend the previous 2 webinars and are interested in seeing them, please email us. We're going to put the email in the chat, and we'll send you a link so that you can view them. Just a few housekeeping things to get out of the way before we start. As you all know at this point, the webinar is indeed being recorded. Please keep yourself on mute. And we're going to try to leave time for questions and answers, but in case that runs short, or maybe the question you have did not get answered, put the questions in the chat so we can keep track of them. And if we don't get to your question, we will try to respond if it's in the chat. You can also email us questions later at the email that will be in the chat box for all to see. In addition, there's also going to be a link to a survey that we'd ask everybody in attendance to complete. If you don't get a chance to complete that today, if you've pre-registered, in the coming days, you're going to receive a link to that survey, as well as an email with some resources for transition planning. If you did not pre-register, please put your email in the chat, and we will send you those resources and that link to the survey as well. So the agenda for today is our speaker, Mr. Felix Martinez, who I am happy to introduce to you. Mr. Martinez is a bilingual certified independent support broker with over 28 years of experience in the public and nonprofit sectors. And he's also been an adjunct professor at Memorial College. In November 2019, he left CitySearch to launch the FLM Strategic Consulting Group. His journey to becoming a support broker and to helping us understand self-direction began during the development of a life for his own daughter. Afterwards, he began the process of becoming an independent support broker with offers for people with developmental disabilities. Mr. Martinez loves serving his community, especially individuals and their families who want to learn more about self-direction. Since becoming a support broker, he's conducted individualized presentations on self-direction. His passion for public service has provided him with an opportunity to serve families throughout New York State. Mr. Martinez is currently affiliated with 12 fiscal intermediaries throughout New York State to better serve families. Okay, with that, I would ask Mr. Martinez to get started, and I apologize for the poor audio. I saw some of the chat comments.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Now it's afternoon. So let me just kind of get us started here. And it's a pleasure to be here as part of this wonderful webinar series with transition planning. This was I've sat in on the others as well, and each time I sat in, I learned something new. So for those of you who are joining us this morning, this is a really great opportunity to learn a little bit more about how to prepare that transition plan, that time where you're thinking about, oh my God, my child's about to graduate from school, I don't know what to do. So definitely, this is going to be an opportunity for you to really take home some additional information about self-direction and how that can help you with that transition plan. And first and foremost, I do want to thank the Rose F. Kennedy CERT team, Children's Evaluation and Rehabilitation Center, for extending me the invitation to Montefiore Hospital and to Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Thank you so much. So our journey, I just want to can everyone hear me clearly? Just so I kind of get a thumbs up from if everyone can hear me clearly. Okay, good. Yeah. All right, great. So as I mentioned, as was mentioned, I've been a support broker now for about approximately a year now. But prior to that, I worked in government and in the nonprofit sector, both in criminal justice and human services. So I bring a lot of experience working with different government entities. And what's very unique is that throughout my experience, I've dealt with a lot of issues that dealt with mental health, individuals with special needs. And my own trajectory with self-direction happened as a result of sitting in on my daughter's life plan meeting, where there was where we were actually looking for a support broker. And my wife was like, we haven't really tried this out. We have to think about something. And then care manager says, hey, you know what? Why don't you just look into it? Maybe you can become a support broker for Brittany, who is my daughter. She's actually 22 years old, and she transitioned out of school last year. So a lot of what I'll be talking about this afternoon is pretty much a little bit about our experiences throughout during that final year, almost pretty much leading up to that. And I've serving families throughout New York State. So from the 5 boroughs to Long Island to Westchester, Hudson Valley, all the way up to Albany, Utica, Broome County. So I'm pretty much spread out throughout the state of New York. But my passion I bring to is really about helping families, especially our families who are having those who are non-native, non-English speaking families, our Hispanic population, who really don't have an idea in terms of where to really get some of the services. So our agenda this afternoon, I can't tell it was this morning, this afternoon anymore. First, we'll go through some official disclaimers. We'll go through some disclosures. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the services that are available through OPWDD. I will not go too much in detail about them, just so that that's an area, front door, OPWDD, that I would leave to the staff and the wonderful people at OPWDD who really have been great partners in working in the self-direction. They've been really great partners. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I will definitely talk about self-direction, giving you all an overview of self-direction. And then we'll go into some discussions about transition planning, some of those key partnerships that you'll form during that transition period, the preparation leading up to that transition period, and then going into what you should think about and what are some of the things you should know beforehand about that transition, especially as it relates to self-direction. There are some really different changes in the way self-direction can function for a young person when they transition out of the Department of Education and into an adult budget, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and especially when we start talking about the budget implications. These slides will be shared with everyone at the end. Definitely the team will be able to share a lot of those the slides with everyone here, okay? So official disclaimer, number one is that the information that we're going to share with you this afternoon is not a substitute for OPWDD's front door information session or an OPWDD self-direction information session. Those are two very key information sessions that are vital to anyone who are seeking services through OPWDD. And so the information that's shared here does not substitute for that. I do not work for OPWDD. I am an independent support broker, so I work for myself. I work for the different DDROs. Each DDRO has their own staff. And so a lot of the information that we'll share today is subject to change because policies within DDRO, both at the district level and at the central office level, are evolving. They're constantly changing. And there have been changes in the last couple of weeks, and there'll be probably more changes even in the next couple of months to come. So the things are always fluid and there's changing. So again, if you're not sure about something, you could definitely reach out to your care manager, definitely reach out to the OPWDD staff at different regional offices. And again, my goal, honestly, this afternoon is to provide you as parents, as individuals who have services through OPWDD advocates, to give you that key information that you'll need to be able to consider whether or not, how can we best plan the transition plan for our loved one, for our son, for our daughter, for our niece, our nephew, for our clients. And that's really the whole, is to kind of get you thinking about how can we make this happen. As I mentioned, again, I am an independent support broker, so this is really voluntarily. I love doing what I do, and I really bring the passion out in what I do here. And again, the goal here is to educate parents, advocates on the process of self-direction and to consider the various options that are available in developing that transition plan for your loved one. And as mentioned earlier in my bio, I am affiliated with several fiscal intermediaries throughout New York State, and together we partner to be able to offer families with the best support possible in developing their budget and be able to leverage those funds effectively and efficiently towards the services and programs that they really want to live an independent life, as close to independent as they choose to. Very important here. So thinking about the whole process, how does it all start? Everything begins through the OPWDD front door. It is the most important component in the process itself. And so for many families, the journey begins at the front door session. And so this is where at front door, where OPWDD begins to determine someone's eligibility for receiving those types of services. And according to the New York State Mental Hygiene Law, in terms for someone who is eligible for OPWDD services, number one, that the presence of a developmental disability that is described by certain qualifying diagnoses. And those diagnoses, this is why, parents are directed to go get psychological evaluations, neuropsychological evaluations, various medical evaluations and assessments that OPWDD and their staff will need in order to make a determination whether or not the person does have a developmental intellectual disability in order for them to be eligible to receive OPWDD services. The disability occurs prior to the person reaching to the age, before they've reached the age of 22 years old. And we can expect that their disability will continue, will be whether indefinite or permanent. And that also that their disability does provide a substantial handicap with their ability to function normally in society. So that's, again, these are some of the requirements in order to begin the process. And so when it comes to making that determination, the assessments that OPWDD requests and asks for are really geared to assist people through, especially the families who are seeking those services. So it's very important here to really get as much information, support, ask questions. The staff at OPWDD are very open and will assist you every way that they can possible. And if you're not really too sure where your regional office is for front door, here is, if you want to take a snapshot, you can. These are the main contact numbers for front door within the 5 boroughs of New York City, Taconic region, Orange County, Rockland County. But one thing is really, I just became aware of this, was that now front door is actually being done virtually throughout the entire state. So you can actually register, and I'm gonna, in my next slide here, this is where you can actually register for those upcoming information sessions for front door, and they're offered both in English and in Spanish, and you can register, and they're offered at different times. 10 o'clock in the morning, 11, 12, 1, 2, even some in the evening. I believe there's one at 4 in the evening. So there are various, they're offered at different times. You can definitely go on if you haven't really started the process and you're thinking, well, you know what, maybe we should. This is what you want to start off with, getting in the process, and this is the link there to get started. Again, completing the process with the front door process is what really helps you start the process of determining which kind of service delivery model you want to get that's adequate for your child. There are traditional services, and then there is self-direction. So let me just kind of talk a little bit about traditional services. So with traditional services, the traditional service model, when a person is eligible to receive OPWDD services, they can choose traditional services or they could choose self-direction. With traditional services, the agencies receive the funds for those types of services directly to offer ComHab, respite, supportive employment. The funding goes directly to the agencies, and then the agencies can then provide the services to the families. The challenge has been in some situations where families who have ComHab, respite, supportive employment, any one of those other traditional services, sometimes you lose staff because of turnover, or the agency may not have enough staff to be able to provide services. So that kind of leaves families in a situation where not having a lot of not having someone to come to their home and provide the services for their loved one. And I'm just talking personal experience here. In our case, in my daughter's case, we've had situations where we did not have a staff member to provide ComHab and respite maybe for about 2 years. And during that time period of 2 years, we did not have staff. So, again, you really want your child to get those services because you want them to thrive. You want them to work towards those goals that you see in their life plan. Self-direction is different. Self-direction is where the funding goes through a fiscal intermediary from the state through the fiscal intermediary, and the fiscal intermediary, the families can now control and determine what they want. And that's where we're going to talk about today, is about self-direction, especially when it comes to how you want, especially if you want to control. You want to have staff on particular days and times. You want to be able to utilize that funding for programs that you probably would not have access to normally through traditional services. So self-direction is that one of those ways of doing that. So with self-direction, it is a service model. It's not a program, it is a service model. And this is where the individual who's receiving OPWDD services, in conjunction with their family members, make decisions. They choose and make decisions as to regarding the supports, their services, and the other types of assistance that they want. And so this is where to give much more flexibility, utilizing the funds that are available through them. And we'll talk a little bit about how those funds, how we determine the budget and those amounts. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And really about self-direction, as I like to tell my families, and we practice this at home as well, is about self-determination. It's about making the choice about those decisions over which types of assistance we want in those services, in those supports, and how we select them. And then having that control. Who do I want to hire? How much do I want to pay them? What hours do I want? That gives me much more control versus that of, under traditional services. And what's really important here is that they're really receiving a lot, the family and the person is receiving a lot of support to not only to self-advocate, to participate, and to become an integral member of their community. Are there any questions? I can stop here for a second if there's any questions that have come up in the chat box. I see it light up, so I just want to just kind of check if there's any kind of questions that have been jumping off that I could probably address at this time.
One participant, Mr. Martinez, asked to go back to the slide with the phone numbers.
Sure.
And I just want to ensure, some are asking that we're going to have access to the PowerPoint. So we'll have access to it, and then we can email it to those who want, to everybody who's in attendance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So to become eligible for self-direction, number one, it starts off, as we mentioned earlier, front door, that's key number one. But number two is also that the family, the parents, and the individual attend the self-direction information session. It's very important. And also that the individual must be already eligible for OPWDD services, and that already are enrolled. This is very important, that they must be already enrolled in the home and community-based services waiver. This is very important. There have been, I've encountered situations with some families where they're ready to go with self-direction, but they were not enrolled in the waiver, and that kind of delayed things. So it's very important that when you're going through the process of seeking self-direction and you're working with your care manager, which is very important, you want to, and you go to the self-direction information session, the staff at the DDRO or the DDSO, they're going to give you a list of brokers in your region who are authorized to provide self-direct, support brokerage services. And so it is the responsibility that on the parent to really look and see, okay, which broker, and start calling brokers and contacting them and look them up. I've had families reach out to me via email. They visit my website, they send me an information, they call me directly, and they'll ask, well, the care manager will reach out to me and say, hey, are you accepting new clients? And they reach out to me in that manner. But you start the process by speaking and interviewing support brokers. And I didn't include this here as a bullet point, but when you get that list, you want to speak to as many support brokers as possible, because you want to get a sense as to whether or not this person is a right fit. And I can send this as an attachment to the team, and they can disseminate to the families as well, a list of questions that I do provide families. These are some of the questions you should know, that you should ask your support broker. There are about 10 to 15 questions you should definitely ask. And I'll be more than happy to share that information with the team, and that they can then disseminate that as an attachment along with the slides here. Self-direction is not for everybody, so it's very important. So if you're trying to determine whether or not self-direction is really right for you, you want to make a decision as to whether you want flexibility in the services and the schedule for your loved one. Are you ready to really make those decisions and services on your own or with support? And do you want more control? And sometimes some families may not be, self-direction may not be for them, only because there may be other situations that maybe the individual may require a higher level of care, that at this point, self-direction may not be the right fit for them. And there are three types of budget authority that within self-direction, and these are, and I'll go through these very briefly: budget authority, employer authority, and budget and employer authority, other known as both. Most families, when they go through the process for self-direction and they seek out self-direction through front door, they wind up and they get, one of the ways that they select budget authority, which is where they have flexibility to budget in their budget to purchase services and the supports they need to live in the community. Or employer authority, which is where the individual with assistance, and that assistance meaning their circle of support, can schedule, train, and even discontinue services with staff. And then there's both, where they have both the ability to control the budget and be able to hire staff through the fiscal intermediary and set those particular hourly wages that are available for ComHab, respite, supportive employment, any one of those different areas. In addition to self-direction, there's also agency supported self-directed services. And those are offered through agencies, and those can serve as an alternative to self-hired staff, where the staff are coming directly from an agency. They provide those services, but as an individual and the family, when I say individual and family, I'm going to say that's what I mean, the individuals and family. They have the authority to hire, to train, to discontinue or terminate staff, but not set their rate of pay. So really, the agency determines the rate of pay, not necessarily the family. And so it kind of limits them in some aspects. And the key partnerships in self-direction is going to be the individual, care manager, support broker, the fiscal intermediary, the FI, and they consist part of the circle support. There may be some other people that may want to be involved as part of the circle support. It could be other family members. It could be aunts, uncles, cousins, people who really take an interest in the development of the individual. So it all depends how you want to determine that circle of support. Thinking about transition planning now. Your child is in their teens, 14, 15, 16. They're going to be graduating soon. They're going to be leaving the educational system. And this is where a lot of those discussions really should be had, especially when we start thinking about self-direction. And in that circle support, as I mentioned, these are the key people. The care manager is integral to that whole circle support, in that they function as a coordinator of all services. Not, including those outside of self-direction. So the care manager is just as much as involved continually, not just with self-direction, but also with those other supports outside of self-direction. The support broker is their primary role is to be able to help the family develop and maintain that self-direction plan and budget. And they meet several times a year to make sure that we're how we are in terms of spending, where do we need to make changes? Are there any new needs that have presented themselves over the last couple of months? Where do we need to make those adjustments? And the fiscal intermediary supports the family and the participant through the payment of approved goods and services. The FI, the fiscal intermediary, help pay for a lot of those different services that families looking for, and they're pre-approved. In other words, the family can inquire with the FI and say, hey, we're interested in enrolling Johnny into this particular program. Is this a good fit? And there are certain requirements that in terms of what types of programs are available that would make a good fit for self-direction. A lot of those conversations are had during the development of the person's budget. And the FI initially reviews the budgets, any budget amendments before they are submitted to the state, and they serve as the employer of record for self-hired staff. Any questions so far as I'm moving through this presentation slides, just to make sure I want to just kind of touch back in?
No, but everything's good. People are very interested in getting your materials afterwards as well.
Okay, great. And again, each self-direction plan is individualized, unique to the individual and their needs. So, which is why it is designed and developed in conjunction with with the individual, finding out what they want, what they like, what they don't like, speak with the family, speak with the care manager, developing that plan completely to really make it their own. So a lot of questions do come up about budget. Like if people are just saying, look, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How do we get down to the numbers? And so there are a series of ways in which we arrive at a budget number. So one of the ways that we do that is, number one, it's called the personal resource account, the PRA. And this is what gives you the final number. Like how much is available for my child, and it determines it. And so it's determined by their DDP2 scores, and that's the Developmental Disability Profile 2. And this is an assessment that is done both at the front door and also by the care manager when they sit down with the family. And they're tabulated in 3 major domains: their adaptive score, their behavior, and their health. And the assessment itself is a series of questions that ask questions like, can Johnny, get dressed on his own? Can he eat without support? Have there been any tantruming in the last, week, month, occasionally? So those are some of the questions that appear in that assessment. And as a family, you're really looking at that questionnaire in terms of, okay, can Johnny really do these things by himself on his worst day? Those are like really thinking about, when you start looking at that thinking, can your child really do these things on their worst day? And when in determining that budget, once we have that final number, the budget can go up based on their needs, but it can never go over. In other words, you cannot overspend. So that's just, which is why on a monthly basis, the fiscal intermediary submits and sends out to the team, this is how much we spent. So it's like a bank statement that kind of tells you, this is how much you spent in staffing, this is how much you spent in programming, this is how much is spent on support brokerage, this is how much we have left, this is how much we have towards the end. And so this is very important. And the amount of funding, which is what I want to show you in a few minutes, is determined on a couple of things. Number one, their county. Where's the person live? So someone who lives in New York City will have a different budget than someone who lives up in Albany. Same age, same DDP2 scores, but where they live is going to be a dramatic difference. Also, if the person is still attending, if they're school aged, if they're still attending and receiving services through the school district, and this includes those who are homeschooled, are they still school aged? And also the budget type. There are different types of budgets. We have both. There is residential only, and then those where it's just really those who live in independent living, but in the certified residential setting. So I'm going to give you an example of how this would look like. So this is what a budget template would look like. And as you see here on the screen, let me just kind of get my pointer here. We have the DDP2 scores. So this is an individual who lives in New York City. Metro Manhattan is the DDRO as a region. So I want to, again, these are the scores that are here. The person still attends school. So their budget, their annual budget based on the DDP2 scores is 42,792. Now, if we were to say, well, someone up in Albany, same score, different county, budget is 33,760. So again, determining where the person lives, their county, and whether or not they're in school is going to determine that PRA. Now, in terms of transition planning, when your child or your loved one is about to transition out, and by transitioning out of education, we're talking about where the person is going to graduate from high school, even those who have an IEP. If they're turning 18, they graduating school, they're no longer attending school. So this is where the prongs, the three prongs that is most important. Number one is the individual less than 22 years old. Are they residing with parents and legal guardian, and are they receiving services through the school district? As long as those three things are yes, it always will be school aged. But if it's where the person is less than 22 years old, lives at home with the parents, but is no longer receiving services through the school district, which means those school district services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, those services are no longer being offered. They are now what we have now, an adult budget. And I'm giving you a change here in terms of DDP2 scores. We have a higher score here. Again, Metro Manhattan, this is an adult budget. Person is no longer receiving services at the school district. So again, what we saw earlier, that 48,000, 40-something thousand, now goes up as an adult budget to 149,900, 899,000 a year. Okay, and again, same score, different county, 120,957. So kind of give you that distinction. But when the child or the individual transitions out of the Department of Education or out of the school district, there's more funding available that can then be utilized and leveraged towards a lot of different services. One caveat with regards to self-direction budgets is that the self-direction budgets, the money the funding that's there cannot be utilized for some of those other therapies. Like, Medicaid provides those services. So, and I won't go too much into detail here. These are better conversations to have one-on-one with families after you found a support broker, and you have those discussions with the support broker as to how to leverage some of those dollars for some of those additional services. When should we begin? Just looking at the time here. Good, we're making good time.
Can I interrupt with one question? There's
Sure.
a question in the chat.
Yes.
The question about, is the CAS another type of assessment they use to determine the budget in conjunction with the DDP2 assessment, or is it separate?
I think the CAS assessment is a different assessment. It does, I'm not sure how that plays out in terms of the budget. When it comes down to determining the budget itself, it's going to be the DDP2 scores, the budget type, and the county in which they live in.
Thank you.
Okay. When should we start beginning the transition process? 14, 15 years old. That's when we should really start thinking about, okay, what should we be forecasting? Because the years, it creeps up on you. I can imagine, I recall when my wife and I were discussing Brittany's care, and we were thinking about, okay, how we would do this. And having those discussions with the family members, having the discussion with the Department of Education transition coordinator is very important about some of those programs and services and the needs. They are a great resource. They can tell you that, you know what, there's a great program here you may want to look into. They have a wonderful weekend respite here. Start the dialogue, find out, do your homework, do your due diligence, because at the end of the day, self-direction means exactly that. It means that you are taking ownership, you're taking the reins, you are steering the services and those supports for your child as together. And so you want to look at what are some of those different activities. Is it art? Do they like music? Do they like dance? What are some of the physical activities? Do they like working out? Do they like exercising? Do they like swimming? Do they have a desire to work? Should we think about pre-vocational services? Should that be part of the discussion? And having the discussions with the transition coordinator, with the Department of Education, some of those transition elements are already in play, but you also want to see how does that develop overall. And also independent living. How do I, can Johnny, does Johnny want to live on his own? Does Susan want to live on her own? How does that look like? Will she want to live within an apartment with other roommates who have similar mannerisms, behaviors, or does she want to live with a living caregiver? There are different variety of ways of doing that. And again, also consider whether or not you want your child to participate in the day have program. You want to visit different providers. If you're thinking about a day have program for your child, visit them, go visit. And for me, when I had to go do this process for my own daughter, I went and I visited quite a few. And the question that I came back to always was this critical question. Is this the type of program provider I want for my child based on what you see? Is it secure? Are the participants being involved? Are they actively involved? Or can you create your own day have program? Create. Again, self-direction gives you the opportunity to create a world of different possibilities for your individual. And so again, we talked about a little bit about age, when they age out, when they leave the Department of Education, there's some budget implications. Again, because they leave the Department of Education, those therapeutic services that they were receiving through the Department of Education, occupational therapy, OT, PT, speech therapy, would now be offered. You can get them in the community through various community providers. Some families still may pay out of pocket. Some may use their private insurance. Some may use also Medicaid before having to leverage self-direction services funding towards that. Prior to the age of 18, there's certain subcategories that are not accessible to individuals who self-direct prior to the age of 18. There's some that might not, and those are subject to discussions and really asking justification through the state. But those are, again, some of those conversations are best had individually with the support broker and with the FI. Is there a question that comes up? Okay. Housing subsidy. So this is something that comes up, especially for those who are over the age of 18, who choose to live independently, or who are sharing their apartment, their home with someone, and they have tenancy rights. So this is where, so they may be able to have housing subsidy added onto their budget. Again, great conversation to have with the support broker and the fiscal intermediary in terms of what are the steps to secure a housing subsidy. And again, there are certain requirements that have to be met. The place has to be inspected. So there's certain requirements that both the district and the state require for someone to have in place before being able to have a housing subsidy. Are they able to continue and pay the rent on their own? It's very important. These are very important conversations to have, especially during the circle support, especially as we're talking about the transition plan. And this is something for those students who are going to plan on going to college, you may be able to leverage a housing subsidy for the cost of dorming in New York State, college or university. Again, but those, again, conversations to best be had with the support broker and be able to see how that can be determined and developed in your person-centered plan. Living caregivers is one of the services that are available through self-direction budgets. This is where you have someone who lives in the household with the participant, and they provide some supports, as needed supports towards a participant with physical support, social, emotional needs, in order for them to live successfully in their own home. What's very important here, as I must stress here, is that the living caregiver is not related by blood or marriage to any degree, so they cannot be a relative. And the individual who has this arrangement must live in their own home. In other words, they must live in their own home or leased apartment or residence. It's not where it's a family residence. They must have their own space, their own home. Family reimbursed respite is one of the other categories within self-direction budget categories. There's IDGS, which is individual directed goods and services, which is where community classes is a whole host of different categories. And I did not, in the interest of time, I didn't want to make sure, because that can be, the budget itself can be another hour and a half discussion overall, but I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to kind of get a sense of what self-direction can offer. And with family reimbursed respite, you're able to, there's $3,000 that's available to the family to use to be able to provide with additional respite. So it gives the caregiver a break from their normal caregiving duties. And this is where a lot more flexibility, where you can pay someone to care for your child, for your individual, to provide respite services or day babysitting services. The maximum amount is $3,000 a year once they have an approved self-direction budget. So just want to be clear that while the budget is being developed, it's only approved once the person has an approved self-direction budget. So there's just for that important there to kind of make that disclosure. Also, that's also available in a self-direction budget categories, direct provided purchase services. And these are services that are available. These are through the agencies. Day have programs, community rehabilitation, respite services, pre-vocational services, to name a few, supportive employment, SEP. These are some of the services that would be provided. There's other services also. They're also available through direct provider purchase services. These are services provided by the agency. They come out of the person's budget to be able to provide a lot of those additional services for the individual. And I'm be more than happy to address any questions from the group, from the audience, with regards to self-direction, processes, anything that I can answer at this time. I'll be more than happy to answer those questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Martinez.
I have a question.
Yeah, just unmute yourself and go ahead and shout out.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
I want to know the provider services that you listed there. Does those services would have to that'll be the direct provider services? Does those services have to be provided from the same agency who is your fiscal intermediary?
Well, there
Or
are
self-direction?
right. Okay, so there's a number of ways that we've been able to leverage direct provider services. So sometimes, and I'll use this as an example. Let's say, for example, that you have traditional services approved through OPWDD, right? Say ComHab or respite. And while you're going through self-direction, the fiscal intermediary also offers traditional services. And you have already someone in mind who you would want to work with your child. So if that person is approved to work through the FI through traditional services, what winds up happening is that person would work through traditional services at the FI, not through the direct provided purchase, because they're in traditional services. Once the budget's approved, that person who you have in mind to work, that's working in traditional services, now transitions over to self-direction, and through self-direction, they may be paid at a higher rate. So let's say, for example, through the fiscal intermediary on the traditional, through the fiscal intermediary, through traditional services, they're being paid $15 an hour, but in your self-direction budget, you may be paying a little higher, maybe $20, $25 an hour for ComHab. So what winds up happening is that once the budget's approved, they transition automatically to the self-direction budget, to the self-direction budget line, and they kind of, in a way, get an increase in their salary. That's one of the ways you can leverage that. For direct provided purchase services, it doesn't have to be solely the fiscal intermediary. It could be any other agency that provides those services. One thing that's very important here is that in developing your self-direction plan is that we look to see which agencies either cost for those services per agency. And you want to kind of look and see, okay, how much money do I want to give the agency to pay for it, or can I better off getting it, through by hiring someone directly? So you want to be able to kind of, it's like shopping around. You want to make sure that you want to maximize your budget, especially when you're dealing with someone who's still a young person and they have not aged out of their Department of Education services, because staffing takes up a large chunk. I would say about 60 to 70% of the budget on average will go in staffing. So if you have a budget of $45,000, for example, just throwing that out there, you can expect between ComHab and respite and the fringe benefit percentage rate, which is determined by the FI, can eat up and absorb a large amount of that budget, and then leaves you with very little flexibility for a lot of the services and programs that you want for your loved one. So that's where part of the discussion with the support broker is, okay, let's look at the budget, let's look what we want, how we can make it work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just to give a little bit of background where we're at. I mean, we're school age, and we're in Medicaid waiver. So we're moving into self-direction. Actually, we're being sort of persuaded / pushed to self-direction. So I just am trying to get an idea, what is the determining factor, meaning more importantly, what to segue from what you were talking about, budgets and respite, ComHab, obviously from Medicaid waiver, we have a plan in place of ComHab and Medicaid respite. I'm just worried, and I've had from my transition from FSS to Medicaid waiver, a very difficult time, and also had services actually limited. I got less respite, and then now I'm moving into ComHab. That being said, so I've been asking around, like, can you give like an idea of the number, the budgeted number for, respite, and also, an idea of, the services such as, swimming, such and such, so that I can make sure that I'm making the right decision for my child where he is at that age, and not go through another one of these difficult transitions from SFS to, Medicaid waiver, because I did actually lose, some services, and I didn't really understand the trade-off, because, from the care manager point of view, I'm sort of being pushed, towards self-direction, and I'm not quite sure if that is correct. Does that make any sense?
Okay, no, it makes sense, and I understand what because it's like going into limbo. You don't know where you're going.
Right.
Right. And so the information sometimes you get as a parent can sometimes be conflicting at times.
Yeah.
So when it comes to developing the budget, one of the key things is that with staffing, for example, you're able to make a determination, how many hours a week do we want to have ComHab here and respite. And it also depends on the age of the child. You know, if it's and I'm just using this as a hypothetical example, if it's a younger age child under the age of 8, you may want to say, okay, you know what, we probably may want more respite hours during the week as opposed to ComHab. And then ComHab, maybe as he gets older, 9, 10, 11, 12, we can start working on a little bit of hours of ComHab and then start to reduce, right? It all depends on the budget, right? So what's most important to kind of work towards is like, okay, with ComHab staff are working towards specific goals in your child's life plan. With FSS, Family Support Services gives you other supports that are available while you're still going through self-direction. So while you're still pursuing self-direction, you still stay within traditional services. You officially transition to self-direction services once your budget's approved. Once you have a budget, and there's 2 types of budgets. There's a startup budget, and then there's the initial budget. So the startup budget is what authorizes the support broker, once you found a support broker and a fiscal intermediary, to begin helping you, the family, to develop that self-direction plan. That's only $2,400. So it allows that person to begin working on developing that plan. And they meet with you, the care manager, and everyone else to begin developing that. That's when you as a parent, you're looking at, okay, how much is this going to cost? How much is that going to cost? We're going to look for this service, that service. The initial budget, up until the point that that budget is reviewed by the DDRO, it's submitted to Albany, and it's reviewed by the FI, reviewed by the DDRO, and reviewed by Albany, and sent back with an approval date that it says, okay, as of August 1st, 2021, your budget is approved. This is your budget. Until that time comes, you're still in traditional services. So families, and it can be a bit of a process to get there. Because again, there's a series of reviews that goes on to get there. If you have a very good broker who can help you navigate those waters, a really great FI, and a care manager that's really driven to kind of make this happen together as a circle support, they can help you navigate those waters to really get to that final point. And again, the number of hours will depend on your level of need. You may want respite after school. You may want respite on the weekends. It really determines whether or not how you want to leverage those hours.
And then I guess, my question specifically is everybody says, self-direction is the greatest thing. You need to move into that. But why if I'm already being serviced at the Medicaid waiver, what makes self-direction better than Medicaid waiver services or, traditional service?
Because you get the control and you get to determine what kind of services you want. If you're thinking about traditional services, at the onset, I talked about how the agencies receive the funding, they provide the service. But what happens if they don't have the staff to provide you the service? Then you're left like we were left for almost a year and a half, not having anyone provide a service. So now you really don't have services.
I guess my question, so I get that because, staffing is very difficult. I mean, right now I have to find my own staff to sign up with, the agency.
Correct.
Well, won't the same situation happen if I go into self-direction? They have to sign up with the FI?
Well, they do, but here's the thing. Some people may not want to work for $15 an hour. With self-direction, you could pay them a lot more. So
correct.
So that's an option that you can. And so again, it's this is where a lot of the conversations that are had with the support broker and the team to kind of determine what will be some of the best services for in your particular case, in your particular individual, in your particular child.
Mr. Martinez,
Yes.
just because the next
Yes.
webinar for those Spanish-speaking individuals
Yes.
is about to start.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, so perhaps anybody who has additional questions can email you. I know you were generous in sharing your email, or they
Yes.
can email us and we'll forward those questions to you. All those emails are in the chat box. Thank you so much for attending. We're also going to send everybody a link, and it's in the chat box as well to give us some feedback. Just right now you see a slide about a Spark. Spark is an online research partnership that's going on right now at CERS. We're going to send you information in the email with that as well for any families that are interested in participating, and this can be completely from home. It's designed to really understand causes and treatment for autism. Again, any questions, please send them to us or directly to Mr. Martinez. And thank you all very much for attending.
Can I just tell thank you to Mr. Martinez?
For sure, of course.
Yes.
Thank you so much. You gave me so much information, and my name is Aida. I will be contacting you because I have similar situation like you, and I see you have a lot of information, and if it's okay to contact you and give you questions.
Yes, absolutely. I sent you
What's
my
the email
sure.
address? I didn't know where to find it.
Sure.
Oh yeah, I got already somebody in the beginning posted his email address. I think that I took picture of. Or you want my email address?
It's
Yep,
in the chat. Mr.
yes.
Martinez's email is in the chat
Yeah, I
box.
got his.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you so
thank you.
much. Yes,
Yes.
I really want to tell you thank you for all of you for a great session.
Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you to the team.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you so much.
Yes.